All right. So good morning and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the third webinar of our MSB Webinar series. The topic for today's webinar is In AI We Trust, Towards Ethical AI in Medical Imaging by Dr. Karim Lekadir. My name is Shalja and I'm the webinar officer of the MICCAI Student Board. I'm honored to be moderating this webinar today along with Vienna Jin, who will be the webinar officer for 2024. Before we begin our webinar, I'd like to take a moment to introduce the MICCAI Student Board. So MICCAI Student Board is a student initiative since 2010. Our goal and mission is to stimulate the involvement of students, enhance student networking in the community, and advise the MICCAI Board on matters for relevance for students. This is the MICCAI Student Board for 2023. If you have attended the conference, you might have seen some of the faces in the conference. We organize a lot of events. Throughout the year, we organize a webinar. And during the conference, we organize academia and industry events, social events, and sports events. One of the highlights of the events that we organize is MICCAI Educational Challenge, which is an initiative of Student Board since 2014. And we ask you to submit library of tutorials, educational material relevant to the MICCAI. Submissions can be in any form, and submission deadline for 2024 will be released soon. First prize is $500, and it is sponsored by MICCAI Society. For more information about the events that we organize, please follow us on social media and never miss an update. So we are on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And you can also go to the MICCAI Student Board event webpage to see the recording of today's event and other past webinars and other events that we organize throughout the year. So without further delay, let's get started with our webinar. We are honored to have Dr. Lekadir joined us today to share his insights on ethics and AI in medicine. Dr. Lekadir is the Director of Artificial Intelligence and Medicine Lab at University of Barcelona. His research interests involve around the concept of trustworthy AI and related methods such as domain adaptation, algorithmic fairness, federated learning, AI traceability, and AI validation. He's the General Chair of MICCAI 2024. This will be the first edition of MICCAI to take place on the African continent. And yeah, let's welcome our speaker. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen.
Okay, let me share my screen.
Yeah.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are. But first of all, I would like to thank the MICCAI Student Board for the invitation. It's really an honor to feature in one of these seminars. And today it's a nice and easy talk, nothing technical. It's just to talk about the concept of trustworthy and ethical AI, which are important. We are engineers normally. We try to develop algorithm and methods, but these are also, I think, interesting topics that would become even more and more relevant in the coming years. And I would like to start by telling you about the state of the art, or not so much the state of the art of the research, because that you know full well how AI in medical imaging has developed over the last year, but more in terms of the product, AI products in medical imaging. So this is a website, actually quite a nice website that is maintained by the American College of Radiology, which features all the AI tools in medical imaging that are FDA cleared. So if you go to this website, and of all the thousands and thousands of papers that are published every year, a number of them become tools, products, and then they get FDA cleared. And as of today, I checked it today actually, there are 263 AI tools in this database that are FDA cleared. Cleared means they are comparable to a tool that exists in the market. Doesn't mean they're approved, which is a more advanced type of validation. And if we look at the more details, we'll notice that there's an increase, especially in the last 6 to 7 years, in the number of FDA-cleared AI tools in medical imaging. This is how they distribute across organs. Brain is in number 1, and then lung, breast, heart, and so on. And something that is interesting to look at is the colors. So the green are image quantification tools, for example, image segmentation. So there's a lot of green. And then the more you go to red, then these are, for example, diagnostic tools, so tools related to clinical decision making. And as you can see, there's a lot of green, not so much red. And I think if I show you an example, you'll understand why. This is a green type of AI tool. This is a low-risk AI tool. It's an image segmentation tool, and it's low risk because the radiologist or clinician that uses the tool can check visually if there is an error, and then they can fix the error if there is one. So there is enormous gain in productivity, but the risk is very low because you can do a visual assessment and correct errors. Now, for diagnostic or treatment planning, that's more difficult. It's difficult to do quality assessments. If the tool tells you it's positive or negative, you don't know if it's making a mistake or not. And that decision could have implications for the patient. If you say that a patient that has a disease is negative, that means that patient will not be treated, have implications and so on. So for high-risk AI, diagnostic treatment planning, there is very little or very few tools that are certified and few that are used in clinical practice. And one of the reasons is the lack of trust. That's what I wanted to discuss today for different issues. Number 1 is generalizability. This is something that we as a community have investigated a lot. The fact that some tools could work in a hospital but not in another. Problems of robustness. You could work with a particular machine but not with another one. We know that AI tools can be prone to security issues, for example, to adversarial networks. So this is a very interesting paper that showed that an adversarial network that changes a little bit the input image in a way that you wouldn't see it with the naked eye could lead to a completely different decision. That problem of fairness. This year there was even a workshop at MICCAI on fairness. This is a paper that showed that deep learning applied to just X-ray images using the largest public databases, it could discriminate against female, young, and Hispanic patients, for example. Lack of transparency is also a well-known issue. Explainability has been widely investigated, but still there are issues. Sometimes the explanations are not clinically meaningful. And more recently, we're starting to find out that the clinicians are interested in these AI tools, but may not have yet the training or the experience to use them. In addition to this, we know as humans, we do not trust easily. So if you remember when the vaccines came, COVID-19 vaccines, a lot of people didn't trust them. And this study from Imperial College London showed that after a month following the introduction of the COVID-19 vaccines, still the level of trust was relatively low. And yet we know how to make vaccines. This is something we've made for decades. It's not something new. AI is new. So the problem of trust with AI is even bigger. So as a first conclusion, I would say we need to work on the technical problems that we're investigating and presenting every year at MICCAI, but we need to look at other things like ethical AI, trustworthy AI, responsible AI. I'm sure you've heard about all these terms. And the question is, what is the difference between all these terms, first of all, and how do they relate to each other? And to answer this question, if you did a literature review, for example, if you read these two reports that are famous one, which I recommend, So this on the left, this is a report of the independent high-level expert group on artificial intelligence that was set up by the European Commission. It was called Ethic Guidelines for Trustworthy AI. So in the title, there's ethics and trustworthy AI. There's the two terms. The World Health Organization published a report that was called Ethics and Governance of Artificial Intelligence for Health. And there they have ethics only. But then if you look at the text of the two reports, there's a lot of overlap. They are addressing the same problems related to problems of trust and ethical compliance and so on. I should add that the report by the European Commission, it's about AI in general, not only about health, but AI in finance, in society and so on, and in health. But if we look at a little bit more at this report, so this is where they try to specify a little bit all these different concepts. And in this part, they define as trustworthy AI an AI that is lawful, ethical, and robust. So ethical is part of trustworthy AI according to them, although later on, they also define as the foundation of trustworthy AI adherence to ethical principles. So there's really a lot of overlap, and in reality, people use them interchangeably. Trustworthy AI, ethical AI. My view is that there is a difference, and I agree with this definition at the top, is that trustworthy AI is more than ethical AI. It has technical components, which ethical AI doesn't in principle, but really there is a strong correspondence between the two. So for example, if we want to take a pause now, if I give you these principles on the left, principles of trustworthy AI, could you find ethical rights that correspond to these? I'll give you 30 seconds just to have a look at this table and think whether you can identify some fundamental rights that you know and whether they correspond in one way or another to these principles. So if we start with the two first, generalizability, robustness, these are really hot topics in our community. Are they really related to ethics? They seem to be technical problems, but they are, and the rest as well. Generalizability is the right to equity. One individuals based in different places, different hospitals, for example, to have access to the same care and therefore to the same AI technologies. Robustness is the right to safety. This is a fundamental human right, the right to safety, to security. And then explainability can be related to the right to information. That's also a fundamental right. And so on. Data privacy is right to confidentiality or to consent, fairness, right to non-discrimination, usability, right to autonomy, and so on. So there is a strong correspondence between trustworthy AI and ethical AI and ethical values and principles and fundamental rights that we would like also to see in the future technology, AI technology that will be used in clinical practice. I would like also here to define a little bit what is it that we're talking about when we say ethics first. And we all say this is ethical, this is unethical. And what we mean is whether something is right or wrong, really. So that's morality. And what Teresa William from the Technical University of Munich recently explained to me is that ethics goes beyond that, is that it's trying to find explanations, justifications for these moral judgments. It's trying to explain. That's very important for AI as well, because we want to understand why something is right and wrong, and why is it that we should allow something as ethical or not, and how we could fix it and so on. So that's why ethics is so important. Another thing in terms of definition I should add is that there are principles of ethics. So first, in biomedical ethics, which is different from ethical AI, there are these four main principles. So, for example, a new technology should be for the good, not should not induce any bad for the individual and for society. And then there's a principle of autonomy and justice. But there are other principles when we talk about AI, for example, transparency and so on. So indeed, it is important to focus on these ethical values, ethical principles, fundamental rights when we try to build AI tools, to make sure that we align with ethical values and fundamental rights. For example, so these are all rights that we know about. We don't think about them all the time when we do our research, but these are fundamental rights. And if we were to build an AI tool that would infringe on these rights, we wouldn't be able probably to go ahead and deploy that tool in practice. Then there are other rights. Of course, rights are subjective in a way, and they change between places and countries and so on. But the rights are not the same, even between Europe and North America, for example. And of course, across the world and so on. And also they're subjective to the persons. Some people think that certain rights are more important than others, or that certain rights are not right at all. So some people think right to dignity, right to well-being is very important. And then if you look at in very specific places, for example, in the United States, in the Constitution, the right to freedom, right to life, right to pursuit of happiness are specified explicitly. Especially the right to pursuit of happiness is something quite specific. Yeah? So right to freedom, right to life. So for example, abortion. Is it a right to freedom of choice, or that prevails, or is it the right to life? And this is why there is a lot of debates along these concepts. And the point I want to make here is that it remains subjective. That's why it's ethics. It's not a law. It's ethics. We need to assess these AI tools as we build them to see, according to our values, according to the values where we are operating, whether they are right or wrong, whether they are complying with the fundamental rights where we are operating. And we should do this exercise each time. And we'll get to that and how we could do that. Here's an example. We would like to build an AI tool for obstetric ultrasound screening. So that's something that most women where I live in Europe have access to. So a few times during pregnancy, a woman can go to see an obstetrician, and the obstetrician will be able then to tell, using fetal ultrasound, whether the fetus is viable, whether it's alive, whether the heart is beating, whether it's one fetus or there are twins, what is the sex of the fetuses, the weight of the fetus, whether it's maybe too small and requires some treatment, the position of the fetus, whether there's any malformation and any other condition. Now, this is really a basic healthcare service in many places, but in many other places, this doesn't exist. So, for example, I traveled this year to certain places in Africa, in villages where this doesn't exist at all. One of the reasons it doesn't exist is not so much the machines. In some places they have the machine. What they don't have are the obstetricians who could read these images and provide all this information. This requires a lot of training. And in rural areas of Africa, for example, they don't have obstetricians. So having AI play the role of the obstetrician, say with the support from a midwife, would have massive impact in these places. It would provide a service that doesn't exist now, and it leads to a lot of suffering. Some women die because they have conditions that were not identified, or just from pain because of lack of preparation during delivery and so on. And the question is now, should we do this? Should we develop such a tool? And the easy question is yes. Yes, of course, it would be useful. Now, the longer answer is, well, let's see. Let's see whether there are any potential ethical issues. And I want to give you maybe another 30 seconds to think about this, and we'll get back to it later, whether you can see any ethical issues. But again, by looking at the rights and ethical values that we've already discussed, is it infringing on the right to justice, on the right to information, privacy, maybe consent, any safety issues? Would it lead to loss of autonomy, and so on? Okay. So we'll get back to this at the very end. But this is an exercise that is important, because as we will see at the end, if we don't do it properly, we may be building a tool that has very serious ethical issues, very serious. And I can tell you this one has one particular ethical concern. This tool, if we were to build this tool, as I showed it here on the slide, it would have a serious ethical concern. Now, how do we do this? We need, I think, a structured approach. That's the main message I would like to give you today, is that instead of doing this in an ad hoc manner for each tool, I think we should follow some guidelines. And that's also a recommendation by many experts and maybe many agencies. So why do we need this? Because as you can see, these issues are complex. There are different values, different rights. They change between places, between countries. Another thing I would like to say is obviously, by no means am I saying that after this talk you'll be able to do ethics. Quite the opposite. What I'm saying is that we need to talk to those who can do it, who can help us do this work, because we're not ethicists and we're not experts in these different areas. So we need to involve stakeholders, different disciplines. And as you will see later, this is a balancing exercise. There are different rights and some of them contradict each other. And I give you the example of abortion. Some people consider that it is the right to freedom of choice. And some consider it, on the other spectrum, it's the right to life. And I'm not taking a stand here. I'm just saying that this contradiction, this debate exists. And it's just a balancing exercise at the end to say, okay, we decide to implement it in this way because we think this particular value or this particular principle is particularly important for this application. For example, there are two rights which can contradict each other: right to privacy and right to non-discrimination. How does that work? So, right to privacy says when you collect data, you shouldn't collect everything, because otherwise people will know who you are. And maybe we shouldn't collect information about your ethnicity, your sex, and so on. Maybe your job. But the right to non-discrimination says we need that information so we can check that there's no discrimination, and so we can make the tool more fair. So now you have two criteria, two principles that are contradicting each other in this particular example. So it's up to you to choose what's more important. I can tell you that personally, I would choose, I think right to non-discrimination is more important, in my opinion, but I could be totally wrong. Yeah? But I would rather that we collected more data, that we implemented security measures to make sure that we still comply with the data privacy, but that we can check whether the tool is discriminating or not. All right, and then of course, ethical AI is application specific. So we need guidelines. So guidelines are simply rules or best practices that helps you in achieving a certain goal. And ideally, the best practices should be achieved through consensus. Let me give you an example of guidelines that made a big difference in science. One of them are the FAIR data principles, or the FAIR guidelines. I don't know if you know them, but these are guidelines that help you when you collect and manage new data to make sure that the data is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And it has a number of recommendations on how you do this. Why it is important? Because if you have data and you don't make it findable, for example, then people cannot reuse it. And that's not good for science and for society. And if it's not interoperable, you cannot combine it with other data sets. So these are some principles and guidelines for data management that made a big difference. And you can go on the website. They have a website and they explain you how to implement each of the recommendations. So we wanted to do the same, but for trustworthy and ethical AI. And we called our guidelines Future AI. We started this in Europe. So the European Commission asked us to work on this with a number of European grants. And then we involved experts from all over the world to help us set up all this in a consensus manner. So we started with all these different goals and principles of trustworthy AI. And we said we cannot keep them all. The FAIR data principle, they had 4 principles. We want a few, not very many. So we said we'll keep 6. And so we combined things together that were sort of interrelated. So we kept these 2, and then we added these 3, and then generalizability. We wanted an acronym that is easy to remember so people can use it. So we replaced generalizability with universality, and with this we got future AI. So this is the guideline, and then we made sure that each of these principles, of course, are meaningful from an ethical point of view and correspond to certain values and rights. These are the recommendations. So we have 28, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but just to say that, for example, for fairness, the recommendation is to identify potential sources of bias before you even start coding. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you want to build an AI tool for predicting heart failure using cardiac ultrasound, say. And what would be the sources of bias if you were to do this in Peru? Now, I chose Peru because I'm involved in a project called AI for Heart Failure, where there is a Peruvian clinical site. And one of the reasons we chose Peru when we put together the proposal is because Peru is is a highly multi-ethnic country. And we were very excited about this. We were interested. They even had a president had a Japanese background, but they have Black population, white population, native population. And it turned out when we spoke to the local experts, the cardiovascular experts, what they told us is that, okay, ethnicity we could look into, but they thought that wouldn't play a major role. What they told us that would be a major source of bias, which surprised us because we didn't even cross our mind, was altitude, because Peru is a country where there's a lot of difference between those who live in 5,000 meters to those who live at sea level. And that's why it's so important to engage experts and others and not assume and not just say, well, I think it's sex and ethnicity and that's it. You need always to ask the question, what could be the sources of bias? And once you know the sources of bias, then you can go and collect the right data and also implement mitigation measures. For example, we could apply data synthesis. So this is another example in breast cancer where we applied data synthesis, which was also related to the talk. The keynote speaker that discussed this at MICCAI 2023. For breast mammography, we found that one of the sources of bias is breast density. So we used data synthesis to synthesize images of high density breasts from low density breasts. So that's one way to fix it. But the reason we could fix it is because previously we spoke with the experts and they told us that this would be a problem. Universality most of these recommendations, you know them by the way. For example, evaluate across multiple sites and perform external testing. One way to do this simply, and it's not something we can always do because it's challenging, but it's to involve different clinical sites from different countries. So in the breast cancer project, which is called RadioVal, we've involved hospitals from Europe, different regions of Europe, by the way, Western Europe, Eastern Europe. So for example, Poland versus Spain. And then we involved hospitals from Turkey, Argentina, and Egypt. This is a project on fetal ultrasound, which is focused on Africa. But here we implemented a tool to select the main fetal ultrasound planes automatically. And we did this in Spain. We built the tool in Spain. We tested it in Denmark. It worked immediately because it's within Europe. It's the same equipment or similar equipment, similar population. But when we tested it in Africa, in 5 African countries, it didn't work in any of them. So then we applied transfer learning, which is something we know how to do in the MICCAI community, and then it worked in all of them. Traceability is the idea of documenting and tracing the production, but also the usage of the tool over time. This is very important because a tool that could work today may not work in 2 years. That's why the concept of continuous learning is so important. And for that, documentation is very important, and also tools to periodically and continuously evaluate the tool. So in the project on heart failure I mentioned, we built this sort of tool to be able to do this regularly and check whether there are data drifts, for example. So in terms of usability, this is important for autonomy and make sure that the end user at the end can use the tool in question. One way to do it is engage the different stakeholders and different end users. This is a meeting we had in Brussels, actually very recently, with patients. So we invited patient representatives from the European Heart Network with support from the European Society of Cardiology, and we discussed the tool, and they gave us feedback, and they gave us really interesting insights that we wouldn't have obtained had we not spoken to them. So this conversation with clinicians, but also with patients, is something we will learn over the next years to do more often. Same thing at the evaluation stage, that it's good to involve clinicians to do a human-centered evaluation, different types of clinicians with different set of experiences, different genders, and so on. For robustness, this is something that we know how to do at MICCAI. In particular, there have been a lot of challenges, such as this one that my PhD student organized a few years back, to test robustness, for example, across different types of vendors of scanners. And finally, explainability. Again, this is something that we've done a lot at MICCAI as a community, but something I would recommend here is to involve, again, the end users, in particular clinicians, in choosing the right explainability methods. So something we did in one of the projects, the one on breast cancer, is we showed them these different explainability methods, and instead of telling them this is the one you should use, we show them different ones, heat maps, counterfactuals, and so on, and ask them which one they are more comfortable with, which one makes more sense given the problem in question, and so on. Finally, there are different general recommendations to make sure there is full compliance, including to investigate application-specific ethical issues. So this is the time for me to go back one last time to the problem I showed you earlier. So if we have this tool to do automated AI-driven fetal ultrasound screening, what would be the potential ethical issues? So using what I showed you, structured approach, it allows us to go principle by principle and check that we are in compliance with that particular principle, and then implement method to fix the problem. So we could check, for example, fairness. So would this tool be fair? So the first question to ask is, what could be a source of bias in this case? So I would like to apply this tool, say, in villages in Africa. Are there data in Africa to build this tool? No, but there are data in Europe, there are in North America, maybe in China. So what could happen? Well, one thing that could happen maybe is that it wouldn't work. It would be biased toward the local African population. And then I would go one by one through all the principles, the universality. So for universality, would it work in a small clinical site in a village in Africa that doesn't have a big ultrasound machine, but instead has a small handheld ultrasound? That's a question to ask and find out whether that is the case, and implement measures so that would be the case, and so on. So go through all the principles. And if we do this, we'll find maybe there's a risk of discrimination. Maybe there could be limited usability because there are no obstetricians, there are midwives. Maybe they wouldn't be able to perform the ultrasound screening properly. Maybe there would be some safety issues because of this. And maybe there would be poor generalizability to these local sites. So these are the 6 main principles of future AI: fairness, universality, traceability, usability, robustness, and explainability. But then, as I showed you before, we have another recommendation here, which is to look at application-specific ethical issues. And here my question to you is, can you see another problem here, another ethical issue for building such a tool? And when we worked on this and we talked to the experts locally, immediately they told us that one of the major problems that we could have here is the so-called problem of selective abortion. There are places where sometimes when they know it's a girl, for example, they would decide to abort. So okay, let's abort. The baby is a girl, so let's abort. Now, this is an important ethical issue, and it's not one that is related to the main ethical values and principles that we typically discuss at MICCAI. It's an application-specific ethical issue that only manifests itself in this particular problem. And to identify it, there's no magic. The best way is to talk to the experts on the ground and tell them, hey, I'm building this tool. What do you think could be a problem? If I give you the list of the rights, including the right to life, do you think there could be a problem related to that particular right? And an expert that knows the field, that worked there for years, will tell you, of course, that if you give the sex of the fetus, then in some cases there would be a selective abortion. So the solution there is to remove sex from the tool and provide all the other measures, the fetus, the weight of the fetus and so on, the position of the fetus, but not the sex. Okay. So this is the end of my presentation. Just to tell you that as one last message is to have a holistic approach when working on ethical AI. There are certain rights that we've already explored as a community at MICCAI: fairness, safety, explainability, and so on. But there are other rights that we need to explore when we build AI tools, and to do this in a multi-stakeholder approach. And that's why these rules are important. I think it's important to investigate each case, each application on its own. All applications are different and have different ethical issues, to engage stakeholders and the experts, and all this analysis as early as possible, not to code and then start looking at ethical issues, but start looking at these problems before coding at the design phase. And then, of course, to think of the AI tools in their real-world environment, because it's completely different from the lab. To tell you that the Future AI framework has a website. I think it's not working at this very minute, but it will be back on soon. We have a paper if you want to read it that explain all this in more detail. And just want to thank you and thank my funders, and I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lekadir, for the informative presentation. I like the idea that the guidelines should be interdisciplinary in nature. You cannot be the expert by yourself just doing data science. It should be interdisciplinary with ethics and humanities and social science to get an idea of what the guidelines should be there for collecting data, for practicing, and for even deploying AI model to different countries. So now we would like to open the floor to our audience for any questions or any comments. You can also raise your hand if you want to speak. I'll try to allow to talk. Please feel free to ask any question about the topic that we discussed. I'd like to hand over the floor to Vienna, who will be taking the questions from audience. I see a few questions in the Q&A. So Vienna, you can go ahead.
Thanks, Jaja. I see there's a question in the Q&A section in the box from Matthews. He said, with the FDA's recent proposal of a predetermined change control plan, PCCP, do you believe it's essential to mandate continual fairness evaluation and open a report of this assessment? Is such an approach feasible in your view? How would you recommend implementing it?
Yes, thank you. This is a very important question indeed. So basically, there are certain regulations that are requiring to have some way to keep track of changes that happen to the AI tools. As you all know, AI tools are dependent of data. So for example, if the data change over time, that there is retraining, and it is important to have a plan that that describe these changes. And the question is, given these changes, is it essential to mandate continuous fairness evaluation? Because, so let's say I evaluated fairness, and then 2 years later, do I need to do this again because the data has changed and so on? And my opinion is that, yes, we have to, because fairness is almost as important as accuracy, or at least we need to be aware of the level of fairness of the AI tool. Now, I'm not saying the AI tool should be 100% fair in order for it to be used, but at least if we do this continuous fairness evaluation, what we will be able to say is that, well, we've identified a bias, we are not able to fix it, but at least we can report it. We can say our tool doesn't work with this type of patients. For example, patients that have a comorbidity, right? So it's not fair in a way. It works with all patients except with patients that have diabetes. But we know that it's a contraindication. We can put it in the documentation, and now we don't use the tool until we fix that problem. And maybe in 6 months, new data will come and will fix that problem. So my answer would be yes, but of course it's a personal opinion and it's not something that is implemented. Yes.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's more like a safety check to tell the users about their limitations of the tool. Yeah,
exactly that. I like the expression safety check. That's what it is.
Another question is from Ala. Said, how is lawful AI related to the ethical AI? Do you think regulation like the HIPAA, HIPPA would need adjustment in this AI era?
So lawful AI means lawful AI means the law says you need to do something with your AI tool. So it's not a question of whether you think it's right or wrong. Something that is ethical AI could become lawful AI if authorities decide that that's the case. So for example, at the moment it is not compulsory to do certain evaluation of fairness. In some jurisdiction, yes, but not in all. But it could become one day something legal, and then it would be lawful AI. At the moment, maybe it's unethical not to do it. If you build a tool and you don't check biases, maybe you could argue that it's unethical, but it's not illegal. So the next step would be to make it legal, but we cannot do it ourselves. It would have to come from the authorities. They would have to vote a law that says, okay, from now on, your tool has to be fair before it can be used in practice. That's the difference. Do you think regulations like HIPAA will need adjustment in this AI era? I'm not an expert in HIPAA in particular. My understanding is that these regulations are being updated, and there are proposals to update them to take into account all these different aspects, of course. So in Europe, for example, we have a medical device regulation, and the last time it was updated in 2017, but there are proposals to update it. So there is an AI Act, Artificial Intelligence Act, that is about to be voted in Europe. Or it's been voted in one chamber of the, but not in all. And at some point, this regulation will be updated for sure. So the answer is yes, basically.
Yeah, I guess the AI is always changing quickly, and the law and regulation need to catch up with this technology.
Yes.
Yeah. And another question from anonymous audience asking, considering the rise to life for the ultrasound patients, would visual clues be hidden? Could it be hidden in the ultrasound?
Okay, so this is a very good question. Unfortunately, I am not able to answer for many, many reasons. First of all, I'm not an expert in this area, and I would say this is a very good ethical question, whether trisomic patients should have the right to life as all patients, and should abortion, for example, be made illegal in this case. That's a question to discuss with experts. And these sort of things happen all the time. These problems appear all the time, and experts meet and discuss, and there are debates, and political parties get involved, and sometimes there are very, very heated debates, including demonstrations on the street, and eventually there are elections, and whoever is in power passes a vote, and these things change. So that's why, as I said at the beginning, when these questions of right and wrong, they are difficult. They require a lot of thinking and debating and so on. And this question, however important it is the same. It would require thinking by the experts and by politicians and so on.
Yeah, I agree. That's why I remember the rule of thumb, like talk to stakeholders and talk to other people and think about out of the lab. Yeah. And the last question is from Camila, and you mentioned that as experts would address many of these questions. Do you believe it's important that people with a technical background and locals are involved in ethical committees, or who should?
Okay, so I'm reading the question. Yes, so I think it's important that these committees become more and more multidisciplinary. So of course, and they are already, by the way. If you look at an ethical committee in a hospital, typically there are clinicians, there are different types of clinicians, there are ethicists, and then there are people who are more experts in data and so on. So they are already multidisciplinary, maybe not enough, and certainly in the case of AI, it would benefit for having data scientists and engineers, because they could at least answer questions. If there are doubts, if the ethicists have a question about certain methods, say, look, this method has been applied, can you explain it to me? Then the presence of an engineer would be very, very important. So my guess would be that yes, it would be very beneficial.
Thanks for the answers. Another question from anonymous audience is regarding the study you mentioned on expandability. Is there a study on which preferred expandability method the clinician choose in your experiment?
Yes, we have performed this study. So I've got somebody in my team writing the paper, so I'm not able to give you more details at this stage. But what I can tell you is that it was a very interesting exercise, not only to know which method, but also to understand when the explanations are important. Because when you have an AI workflow, you have different bits and pieces. You have maybe the quality control, you have the segmentation, you have the labeling, and then maybe you have an automatic decision. Not all the time and explanations are needed. And that's what we found out. Sometimes the clinician said, look, for this particular case, I don't need explanations. There's no need for it. And for this particular case, I would need an explanation and I would prefer this particular method. There are also disagreements, by the way, between clinicians. So that's also, another approach would be to use different explanations for different clinicians to give sort of different options in the tool. So the clinician would use the solutions they are more comfortable with. And finally, I should insist, this is application specific. Whatever explainability method we will use in our project, we could use a different one from a different project. So it's not that it's the best. It's just that for that particular case, it was the most appropriate.
Yeah, so find some local solutions for the local task.
Yeah.
Another question from Michael regarding the bias issue. In retrospective analysis that predict outcome, there will be an inherent bias based on the social-economical determinants of health. For instance, a patient from richer geographic areas or those not receiving workers' compensation are more likely to have better outcomes. But how do you use those findings within an ethical framework for making predictions?
Yes, so this is an important question also because I feel that a lot of the time socioeconomic determinants are forgotten. Unfortunately, even though I feel they are the most important for health. So I would say our framework, for example, it recommends that before even starting coding, to analyze all these different sources of bias and then identify whether, for example, socioeconomic determinants could be sources of bias. Do this at the very beginning, not wait till the end. Then collect the data that have this information. It could be profession, it could be income, and so on. And then see whether the data is imbalanced or balanced. And if there are imbalances, whether certain mitigation measures like data synthesis, as I showed, or other bias mitigation measures fix the problem. So to answer your question, yes, socioeconomic determinants are important. They need to be analyzed at the beginning of the project each time, and then implement mitigation measures if necessary.
Thanks for the answer. Is there any other questions? Some online question.
Yeah, thank you, Vienna, for moderating the Q&A session. It seems we have come to the end of the webinar, and I would like to thank our speaker once again for such an informative webinar today.
Thank you.
We would also like to thank MICCAI Society for all the help in organizing the webinar. Before we wrap up, I would like to remind everyone that if you have any additional question or if you're thinking about ethics and AI, please feel free to email us and I'll forward the email to Karim. You can also contact us through social media channels. And we want to make one announcement that we are also looking for students to fill some of our positions in MICCAI Student Board. So we'll be soon advertising on our website and also through social media. So please keep an eye out. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you at our future events. Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you.